And as we continue on today, we find these opportunities for hope and gathering and togetherness around the Christmas season. So we're so excited that you all are joining us for that. Especially for a lot of you, as you think to what's to come in the next weeks ahead and some of the opportunities for hope that you all might have as BC students. You often might not find yourselves finding moments and opportunities for growth or for pause and for reflection. And so maybe some of the things that you want to pause on over the next couple weeks or reflecting on are moments of grades and focusing on final exams and what's to come. Or maybe some of you are trying to figure out or discerning questions and pondering different thoughts that you might have had recently. And maybe others, as the Christmas season and New Year are coming, are trying to figure out relationships or friendships, or maybe there are conversations that are to be had. And we hope that you can sit with that hope as we enter the Christmas season. But so often with hope comes joy and anticipation. And we are very filled with joy to be with you all tonight. And so I'm going to ask my friends up here, what are you all finding most joyful today? Emily, what's bringing you most joy nowadays?
Yeah, I feel like out of the four of us up here, I probably resonate with where you all are the most, being that my final, I'm taking classes right now, is tomorrow. And I'm so ready to be done with it, just as I'm sure many of you are too. But for me, the thing that is on the back end of that final is I am living in my own space with my sister instead of roommates this year for the first time. And I've been planning my Christmas decorations since literally July. And I've been starting to slowly decorate, but the one thing that I've saved is our Christmas lights for outside, a literal light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. And so tomorrow, once I finish my final, I'm so excited to start putting those up and really feel like I'm in that Christmas spirit.
Yeah, I completely resonate with that. Just recently, I moved in with my partner, and we're sharing that space together. And we just this weekend set up our Christmas tree and have been putting up different decorations, and just getting that opportunity to put our both our individual ornaments up, as well as some of our shared ones that we have bought from some of our trips and other experiences that we've shared together has been really, really special. And then there are also some other fun opportunities, like debating about whether the tree should be white lights or if they should be rainbow lights.
Phil, I really love that. About 2 weeks ago, my beloved New England Patriots were getting blown out by the Miami Dolphins. And my wife, Anne Marie, said, you know what, this is a great time to put out our Christmas lights outside. You don't need to watch the game anymore. And it was a great display of white lights. And there was such a joyful freedom in that. And we really, it gave us hope because we were so excited about, Advent coming. And you just made me think about that. So thank you for sharing that.
So for myself, when I've really thought about togetherness, hope in the season and the holidays, my mind always goes to family game nights during the holidays. Games have been a really integral part of my life since my childhood. I can always remember those stories of being with my cousins, and honestly, probably to get us cousins to stop bickering with each other or fighting with each other during the season. Our family would bring us a different board game to play, and we would just jump in. And we started off with kind of those classic introductory family games like Sorry, Candyland, all the kind of different classics. And I feel like every family seems to have some of those classics that they come back to, that when they get back home, they're always playing. I feel like there must be some for you all, some of those games that have been really integral to all that you've done.
I think back, we had a foosball table on Christmas Eve, and we were allowed to open one gift. And myself, my cousins were so excited. Then all of a sudden, the adults just took over the foosball table. So it wasn't really a board game, but in that same vein and spirit, it was memorable.
For me, the one that comes to mind is the game Rummikub, and especially with playing with my grandma and one of my sisters. My grandma, we call her a card shark, and I would hate to be the person after her in Rummikub because she would always be so good and pick all of the plays that I wanted to make, but it was still fun to play that game with them together.
With my dad's side of the family, we would always play Trivial Pursuit, and it was always the side of the family that I was on. I would always make sure that I had the buzzer and would make sure that everyone stayed within their time limits and was able to get to put the little pie pieces in the little pie. But I didn't get any questions right, but it's the memory of the game that's most important.
And I love hearing that. I think games for me has always been an expression of love and joy and a way to gather with different people. But what started off as those kind of silly children's games that we would do to have the cousins come together started to grow into a greater enjoyment and obsession. You move from a fun game like Candyland into 6-hour degenerate games of Monopoly that go way too long and arguments with the family, or a game of Risk that you play for too many hours, have to go to sleep, in the middle of it, wake up in the morning and try to finish it off with your family. Games have just always been something that I love diving into. Strategy, playing co-op with people, tricking someone at the end, getting a victory out of the last second. Like, it was just such a fun way to jump into things. And really what started off as a hobby really started to become like a personality trait, something that like I can't help but talk to people about, just how much love that there is there. But more than just the games, I don't actually remember a lot of stories about the games themselves when I think back to stories of the holidays and games with family. It's always the people, and it's always the gathering and the laughter and the joy that comes from those different experiences that are what I remember most. I think board games are just such a great way to get people together for either a common goal or a common goal to win against one another. And there's also just so much time to have conversation with people during a game, in between turns, whether it's strategizing about the game or asking someone about how things are going and taking a quick divergence from the game to chat about how things are going on. So what really started off as that kind of like fun little tradition started to become something that was a really easy avenue for me to connect with other people and engage with people and find that tenderness and care with one another. A story that I feel like particularly really demonstrates that has been this ongoing game that I've been playing with my college roommates since I graduated. It's a game that we've been playing for like 6+ years, and yes, it's the same game. We have not yet finished it because we can only play about once a month or so. But it's just such a special way for us to stay connected with one another. Since graduation, none of us have lived in the same state, and so we've had to find a way to virtually connect with one another and still make sure that we're keeping up the friendship, even though we don't have that physical presence with each other. And so while the game is what we use to get us together, we really use that space to reconnect, to hear about the highs and lows in our lives, updates, what's going on. In these spaces, I've heard about huge moves across the country. I've heard about people getting into PhD programs and getting into medical school and residencies and fellowships. I've heard about engagements and relationships. And it's just been a space for us to share about ourselves and to make sure that we're keeping that check-in together. And so whenever I really think about the holiday season, the hope and joy that comes from the season, it always comes from the memories of the people that I'm connecting with and making sure that I am using that time to be with one another. And it really becomes this beautiful space of companionship, connection, and love with one another.
Thank you, Phil. And that makes me think about growing up as an only child. I know that might be surprising to a lot of you, but I am an only child. So Christmas time was very, very special in my family. And we would gather at my Auntie Mary's house, not too far from here, about 20 minutes from here, every Christmas Eve. And this was one of those holiday traditions in my family that would start at probably about 5 o'clock and would run probably to about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was great because my cousins, my aunts and uncles, so it was everyone on my mom's side. It was probably about 17, 18 of us. And it was just amazing because when I was around 5 years old, I had my first experience of truly a peaceful and joyful Christmas. And I was fixated by a Christmas tree. My Aunt Mary had this huge artificial Christmas tree in the living room, right overlooking the porch, and it was amazing. And I know artificial tree, it wasn't a real tree, but for a 5-year-old, I was mesmerized. It was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. These lights, the gifts, of course, as an only child, sometimes spoiled. No, not spoiled anymore. I promise you that. I'd see all these gifts, but it was the lights, and it was the meaning for me, even at 5, and I had no idea what I was experiencing. But really, the Christmas tree for me was just such a memorable and meaningful experience of joy and hope. I'd ask my colleagues right now, can you think of an experience with a Christmas tree growing up or even now that's memorable or has meaning for you?
Yeah, we would always celebrate Thanksgiving at my dad's sister's house, and my Aunt Barb had a 12-foot artificial tree in their living room. And every year after dessert, all the cousins would go downstairs to get the tree. And as the youngest cousin, I would self-proclaim myself as one in charge of putting up the tree. And so I would give directions to all my older cousins on where each piece had to go and make sure that the tree got up just in time.
For me, not so much about the tree itself, but a memory that always gets brought up at family gatherings and events is two of my brother and my older cousin, when they were about 5 or 6, opened everyone's presents the night before Christmas. And so we all woke up to that. And still now, 25 years later, they get that comment gets brought up every year about, hey, make sure you don't open the presents this year.
That's so good. I grew up outside of Dallas, Texas, and it's a town called Grapevine, which is affectionately known as the Christmas capital of Texas. It's a really big state, so it's kind of a big deal. And my family takes that really literally. And so we had Christmas trees in like every room. And I just remember like growing up, always being so excited to get to Thanksgiving. One, because it was fun, but then because the day after Thanksgiving, we finally got to put up all the Christmas trees.
Thanks, friends. And Philly made me think one of the only guidelines or ground rules that I had as a young person from my mom was to stay away from the gifts, and I didn't listen to her. I would always pick at the packages as well too. The Christmas tree, I would ask my mother, Mom, is this where I pray to Santa? Thinking about Santa and lists and things, and is this where I pray to Santa? And my mom, she smiled, she laughed, and she said, no, you write letters to Santa and talk. This is where you pray to God. And really, at a young age, she even told me, whether it's a Christmas tree or a church or in your bedroom or just outside, you can pray anytime. And that was the first time, and I can still remember her saying that to me. And it had great meaning. And I think back, and it allows me to really feel so full in my heart with joy of this season of Advent and Christmas. As I got older, and like a lot of our families, traditions change. People got married in my family. People moved away, and we weren't able to celebrate the way we once were. And that gathering space, that communal space that was so important to us had changed, and eventually people in my family passed away as well too. So like anything else, and as you have more lived experiences, your journey changes. And for me, it moved me to a place called Boston College, probably about 1996 when I arrived here. I found new communities. And then in time, I found the Midnight Mass community at St. Ignatius of Loyola, right around the corner here. That became a meaningful, joyful, and hope-filled experience for me around Christmas. But even more significant than that was my ability to reflect and realize that I was lonely. I was isolated from my family. And that really caused me to be sad. But at the same time, that community lifted me up. And I developed a tradition, started probably about, 15 to 16 years ago. Part of that tradition was to attend Midnight Mass, and a little after 1 o'clock in the morning, anyone that's ever been to Midnight Mass, they're beautiful, they're joyful, they're blessed, but they're long. I would make my way home, but before I went home, I would kind of go up Com Ave, go in the Linden Lane gate, and I would circle around Gasson Hall to where our Christmas tree is. Now, back then, because I'm dating myself, I was much older, before St. Mary's Hall was renovated, there was a larger Christmas tree there, and I would stop on the roadway. BC police would see me at night. They said, what's this guy doing up here at 1:15 in the morning? But I would stop, and I would think back to those days of joy in my heart with my mom and my dad, my entire family, and remember what my mom said. And I lifted up in prayer at the tree. Now, again, didn't mean that I was not praying at Midnight Mass, quite the contrary, of course. But I was remembering her words in my heart that you can pray and talk to God wherever you are. And those meaningful moments to me, I lifted up a prayer for companionship. Now, a lot of people that know me know that I'm not a big about myself person. I very rarely pray for myself, or I'm always trying to think of other people, very much what St. Ignatius lived. But this one time, I prayed for companionship because I felt so lonely. And it's hard because I haven't really shared that story with many people. And I think it's significant for the season because it reminds me of the power of prayer. And it reminds me to lift up family and friends and colleagues and those that you love. And for me, I just prayed. I said, Lord, one day allow me to have the companion in my life that I can share all of my traditions with, my faith, joy, hope in my heart, and share this tradition with. Several years later, the prayer was answered. And the greatest gift I ever received was my wife, that I was able to share that moment with. So when I think of this season, I think of that joy and hope, but I think of the Christmas tree. And it has great, great meaning for me.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. Were you able to go see that Christmas tree before coming to Agape Latte tonight?
Matt, that's a great question. I want to turn to my colleague and friend, Emily Rayball. Self-disclosure, because I've been here so long, I've known Phil and Emily since probably their sophomore years at Boston College, and I've had that great joy and privilege of knowing them for a long time. But a sophomore member of CAB came to me probably, I think it was the fall of 2016, and asked me if I would participate in the tree lighting. So, Matthew, yes, I did experience the tree lighting tonight, and yes, I try to make it a yearly tradition.
We're so happy that you said yes so many years ago to me knocking on your door, begging that you'd come play. Thank you. And it's such a good tradition. I hope so many of you got to experience it too. And from being a student and now a staff member at BC, something that I always look forward to as well. But truly, my favorite Christmas tradition doesn't happen on campus, unfortunately. It happens in my house at home, and it is our Christmas cookie extravaganza. So you already know I grew up in this Christmas-centric town, which is great. But in my house, years ago, I can't even remember when it first began, my mom decided that she wanted to have not just a normal, like, let's bake some Christmas cookies for Santa and some friends, but like, let's go all out. So we invited all of our family, my cousins, my grandma, my aunt and uncles, come to our house and just bake cookies all day long. It got to a point where everybody, once they were able to like reach the oven and not explode everything out of the KitchenAid with making the cookies, would make like 1 or 2 batches each. So we end up with like hundreds to thousands, almost 1,000 cookies to share with one another and with our families too. And it was so fun. And in between times, I think to what you were saying, Phil, while cookies were baking, we would sit in the kitchen table and play board games or watch Elf or other Christmas movies on the TV, and just really being in that spirit of Christmas is something I look forward to every year. But really, while that happened in our kitchen during Christmas time, the kitchen has always been a central part of my family and really the centerpiece of our home. And I think that really started with my mom. She grew up working in a family restaurant in upstate New York. And from the time when she was little, she told us that she started in washing dishes, but then they had a step stool for her to learn how to cut and prepare the food and start to cook from there. And so she's not a chef, but I think of her as one. And that is translated into our own family with cooking of meals every night. Even this past week, well, Thanksgiving is a little bit different with being home. That was a whole event in and of itself. But on like Wednesday night, she made us like a full 4-course meal. We had like all the vegetables with asparagus and steak and all the things. And it was just so great to be able to like come together over that food and be in that space there. And it was expected of us as our family to really help to prepare those meals too. So I learned how to cook at a young age, and we set the table and would come together for family dinner every night. Homework was to be put aside. No devices were allowed at the table. As we would sit down, the Red Sox, even in Texas, my dad was obsessed. We were always on TV, but we would mute them as we would start to eat dinner and gather to say grace and be grateful for the food that we had together. And at the end of our grace every night, which is still something that we do, everybody would go around and say a special prayer. And that could be just, a lot of times for me, it was just family or a friend that was on my mind, or if I had a big test coming up the next day or things like that. And in a lot of ways, it was the same. At night tonight, I had a great meal in front of me, and it was pretty much my prayers between the food I got to eat. But other times, I was more intentional about it. It still at that point felt a lot like it was a checkbox of we do the prayers, we get the food, we move on, we've said hi to God for the day, it's good to go. And I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school my whole life through BC, and was in Mass at least twice a week on Sundays and Wednesdays with the school itself. We had theology classes. And so my faith in my mind was this thing that existed in the walls of a church, or existed in prayers before bed, or existed in an A that I could get on a test in my theology class, and something that I felt like I just had to check the box, could master, could figure out. But I didn't really have that like relational connection that I heard people describe about when it came to faith, or a personal feeling of faith. And that really lasted until I came to Boston College and started to hear of this idea of finding God in all things, and was open. My heart and my eyes were really open to the idea that God can exist and faith and love can exist in so many different spaces. It doesn't just have to be in the theology classes and spaces that I was reading about God, or in the church when I was listening to a priest talk at me from the front of the room, but could be in so many different spaces. And for me, like, I find God in walks on the beach. Like, I love the beach. And I think so much of that is being able to be connected with nature and feel a calm and a presence. Or I see God in a hug from my dog, and like you look into a dog's eyes and you know there's something else there, and knowing there's something coming back from that. And I see God in being around my kitchen table and getting to gather in that space. And the irony is not lost on me in that is so connected to our faith, right? It's exactly what Jesus did at the Last Supper, of gathering around a meal with his friends and embracing that time together and really being present in the space. And as I think about my kitchen table and the memories around that and gathering in that space, the lessons that I learned were really so centric to faith, and it was there all along. It was the idea that everyone has a seat at the table, right? We can always bring more space for people to come in. All are welcome. And to be able to share in the space in the same way that Jesus and Mary, Mary and Joseph are welcomed in to the manger to even have Jesus, and not knowing the ripple effect that could exist through that. It was being able to be gathered around a table with people and recognizing their sacredness and all of that. So I, in 2 weeks, am hosting my own very first Christmas cookie extravaganza, and I'm so excited about it. But really, I know now that it's not just about the cookies, but really about the gathering of the people and the smiles and the joy that brings, and the spark that lights up. The cookies just make it a little bit sweeter, too.
And well, maybe you could bring some of those for some joy at the Ronner House at 96 College
96
Road.
College Road,
Once
we'll
you
be
have
there.
that hosting.
Yeah, I love how breaking bread, food brings people together. You know, I think back even to in my culture, the Korean culture, we have a dumpling soup New Year's Eve every New Year's Day, and just having that tradition with the family and that connection, I think, is so beautiful, and the beauty that food has with community.
Yeah, you know, growing up half Italian, even though my mother said I was 90% Italian and 10% Irish, fish. We would do 7 fishes. I remember the shrimp spaghetti sauce to this day, and I can taste it. And breaking the bread has great meaning in our family as well, too. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks. Yeah, I remember the 7 fishes on the Italian side of my family. We would always go to my grandparents' house on Christmas Eve, and my grandma would have the 7 fishes that she would make for everybody. And I remember then going home from my grandma's house, and we would be in the car, and I'd be looking up at the sky, trying to see if Santa had started making his way to Cleveland, Ohio around 10 p.m. And then I remember going to bed, and I was so excited to go to sleep because I knew when I woke up that hopefully there would be a visitor that was there the next morning that had visited the house and would leave some presents the next morning. And I remember that one of my favorite presents came when I was 3 or 4 years old, and it was my first car. I got a ruby red toy remote control Jeep that I got to drive and sit in. And it started my love of cars and my love of Jeeps. And I remember toying around the backyard. Sometimes I would pick my brother up in the backyard and drive him to the front yard and drop him off and really have those moments. And since that time, the act of driving and being with other people has been something that has just brought me so much joy, because you never know what can come from a journey or a destination. That sometimes you know where the destination is going, and other times you don't, but being in community with others. As a family, we would often go to Myrtle Beach when we were younger. And what 12-year-old do you know loves to drive for 12 hours in a car from Cleveland to South Carolina? But what I loved about it was that I got to watch all the other cars and see different license plates from different states and make up stories and guess and think about where people may have been coming from. or going to the bottom of the driveway, waiting for my dad to come home from work and hopping in his pickup truck and him letting me sit on his lap and back the truck in and park the truck when I was younger, and finding some of those moments. But the act of driving really changed for me when I turned 16. And I loved to just be in the car alone. And on Sunday afternoons, my parents would let me take, ironically, I had a Jeep. They let me take the Jeep and I'd go to my grandparents' house. And I'd drive the 5 minutes to Nani and Papa's house, the Italian side of the family. And I'd walk in to the house that was set at 77 degrees year round. And my Nani would be in the kitchen doing some crosswords, cooking some veal cutlets, always asking me if I wanted a sandwich. My papa would be in the TV room, and we'd go in and we'd watch some sort of old sitcom and have conversations about life and have conversations about how everyone's week is going, usually learning something new about Papa and his background and the stories that would come with that. And those visits lasted around an hour, always ending with a little bit of cash in my pocket so that I could get a sandwich that week, just so I didn't go hungry. And then I would drive the 5 minutes down the road to Siti's, the Lebanese side of the family. And I'd always walk into Siti's house, and Siti would be watching TV. Usually some form of Cleveland sports team would be on the TV. The Cleveland baseball team was always her favorite. And so we'd watch a couple innings of baseball, maybe watch a little bit of the news, but we'd have conversations. And Siti would always talk about her hopes for me, wanting me to take better care of my health. Sometimes it was trying to find a hobby, maybe a relationship, but she always ended it with, she only just wanted to make sure that I was happy. And those are some of the moments that I would love about driving. And I often found that when I was alone in the car, that I had these moments of prayer and moments of reflection, and would seek and yearn for some of that in my life. And as I continued to drive, I remember driving to high school, thinking of the next project that the Student Senate could put on. Or when I was going to the start line for my first half marathon during a weight loss journey that I've been on, and praying and thinking that I would make it to the finish line, having no idea where that might lead me. Or going on drives with friends to the airport. I love taking people to and from the airport so that you could send people off or welcome them back. Or on a 3.5-hour drive with some friends to New York a couple months ago, we turned a 3.5-hour drive into a 5-hour drive because we had to do our highs, lows, and our buffaloes to make sure that we can reflect with each other on how our weeks were going and how life was going. And so finding these moments of positivity in drives. But then I've also found in my life that driving has taken on other significant forms, when prayer has maybe turned into more challenging prayer or more hopes. When I drove from the airport to the hospital to see Papa before he went into hospice 5 or 6 years ago. Or last Christmas, driving from Boston to Cleveland, going right to the hospital to see Siti. And when I walked into her hospital room with my cousin, it was just my grandmother Siti, my cousin, and I. And she asked if we can pray the Our Father together because it was her favorite prayer, and she was so excited and so happy to see us and was grateful for us being there. Or this summer, I had plans to hang out with my cousin who I hadn't seen in a little while. And I had a friend that was going through a pretty tough time. And so I texted them earlier in the morning. I said, hey, are you okay? And they texted me mid-afternoon as I was on my way to my cousin's in my car, and said, actually, no, would you mind picking me up? Could we go for a little drive? And so I made a little detour and I picked them up, and we spent 3 hours just driving around Boston, stopped by the ocean and just stared out at the water and just reflected and prayed and talked about life. And it's so often with these moments that I've gotten the ability to think about hope and to find the opposite of loneliness in a vehicle and in a car, and to have the ability to tell individuals and to show them that you are enough in some of these moments. And so I yearn and I seek for those moments with others because it gives me such great hope. And so as we start to think about wrapping up in the Christmas season, what gives you all hope around the Christmas season? What is your hope for the folks who are here as we head into this Christmas season?
Yeah, recently I've had both, I think, a really challenging but a really beautiful moment of finding hope. My grandpa passed away this past weekend, and while extremely sad and a huge challenge for the family, I've seen so much hope and joy from the connection with the family, the outpouring of love and stories and companionship that we're providing for one another. And even though I'm all the way here in Boston and my family is all the way across the country in California, just knowing that there was that support and that we're all caring for one another and remembering him, and also really uplifting his belief that he was moving on to the eternal life, and his faith and his journey was just really beautiful to see. So finding that hope in challenge, but also in that beauty of community has been really special for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Phil. I really empathize with that. And for me too, my Christmas and holidays this year are going to look a little bit different. And I think for me, as I think about hope, I really think of it in this idea of hope being faith in the unseen, hope being believing that there's something more, something good on the other side. And I think a lot, especially now about in the holiday season, of really not knowing what tomorrow brings. None of us know. And we hope that it brings good grades on our finals, or hope that it brings joy in the Christmas season. But I think really because of that, leaning into being present with the people we're with and in the spaces that we're with, and taking time to tell people how you feel about them and that you love them, and just knowing that like tomorrow's not promised. So let's lean into the hope of that today.
Yeah, there's so much around the Christmas season that folks can feel some of that isolation. And so the hope that folks or people who need to hear it feel the opposite of loneliness, feel that they're enough, and allow themselves to feel the love that they deserve, but allow others to love them as well. And to have that self-love and that love of others, I think, is so important around this time of year, especially when it could be particularly isolating for groups of people.
Oh, thanks, friends. Really hard to follow that, but I think for me, the hope is here. The hope is here in this room. The hope is here on our campus. My hope, and a lot of you around this room have heard me say this, is for people to go into your hearts, to take the time away from papers and exams and who's getting what gift and am I studying abroad next semester and room selection and all of that. Take the moments that you need to go into your heart and to be joyful and to be filled with gratitude. St. Ignatius of Loyola once said, if you have gratitude in your heart and you're grateful, that's exactly where you should be, okay? And I think for all of us, and really for all of you, important from us is this: be grateful. Find joy in your blessings and your gifts and all of the people in your life, from your family to companions on the journey, to significant others, to friends, to roommates, to coaches, to advisors, to mentors. Be grateful, and be grateful for those moments, and don't run too fast. So my hope, I think, shared by my colleagues and for all of us, is during this Advent and Christmas season, take the moments of pause, go into your heart, turn away from the noise, love yourself, care for yourself, but show that gratitude, show that faith, show that joy, show that gathering, show that to yourself. And you know what? In gratitude, lift that up into what prayer means for you. It could be reflection or meditation or prayer. That's my hope for all of you.
And so as we go into the Christmas season and we continue these hopes for you, whether it's having a board game night with some friends, or maybe it's going up to the Christmas tree and saying a prayer, or maybe it's gathering folks around your Christmas table and baking cookies, or texting a friend, or asking someone to go on a drive with you. Our hope is that you find your faith in this season and recognize and allow yourself to believe that it's very real, and that you celebrate that, and that you all have a Merry Christmas. Thank you.